Oh, HDMI. One of those things we love to hate. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are stuck with it. So today I wanted to talk about some options for running HDMI signals over a longer distance than you might typically be able to do. So those who aren't already familiar, HDMI cables, well, HDMI was never designed to run for very far. So getting it to run more than about, I don't know, 8 meters, maybe 10 meters, you kind of have to do some special things in order to make it work. And when we're doing video, live video, we need to be able to extend the distance that we're running an HDMI signal from a camera to a switcher. So in this case, I'm using my ATEM Mini Extreme and the Canon EOS RP camera, but fill in whatever other models you happen to want to use. So any of the ATEM Minis or like Panasonic GH5, whatever. Any camera has an HDMI output, any switcher that has an HDMI input. If we need to run signals over a distance, there are some things that we need to do in order to make that become nice and reliable. So I've got a few options here, and I'll go over each one of those and tell you about some of the pros and cons of each. Alright, so first option I want to talk about is just getting a long HDMI cable, and this is probably the most obvious solution, right? So it's the first thing that everybody tries, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on how far you're going, and it also depends on the equipment you're using. So some cameras, for example, output a more robust signal than others, and some receiving devices like a switcher do a better job of handling a weak signal than others. Along with that, the quality of the cable is kind of all over the map as well. So you might get a cable that looks nice and thick and heavy duty, and you find out that it's terrible and it doesn't work very well. So you can't tell by visually looking, you can't tell by the reviews necessarily, but you need something that's going to work for you. So end up buying multiple different cables, trying them out. Sometimes you find out that some of those cables don't even work for very long. They might work initially, but after inserting and removing a few times, they've been coiled and uncoiled a few times, they're just no longer reliable. You get signal dropout and all sorts of problems like that. So I would only go with a long HDMI cable if you're running for a distance of less than about 8 meters. Even that might be too much with some equipment, but that's kind of where I found the longest that I can run HDMI and have it be at least somewhat reliable without any sort of converting to another signal type or a booster or something along the way in order to repeat the signal and make it stronger. So yeah, so if you're tempted to just get a really long HDMI cable, I wouldn't do it if you're gonna have to run the signal more than, I don't know, 6 to 8 meters, maybe 10 meters on the long side. I've heard people that have been able to get more than that, but in my own experience, I've never been able to get those kind of lengths to just be 100% reliable. So if you want something that's going to last for you after repeated inserting and removing and coiling and uncoiling and possible dirty connectors and everything, you probably don't want to go anything more than about 8 meters on those. Alright, say that you need to go just a little bit farther than what you can get with just a single HDMI cable. There's a pretty inexpensive way you can get a little bit of additional distance on top of that, and that is to use an HDMI splitter. So this is more sophisticated than you would need. This is a 4-way, but basically you take the output of your camera, run that into the input of an HDMI splitter, and then run the output of your splitter into a switcher. And what that's doing is regenerating the signal. So this splitter is basically recreating that signal. So it reads what's coming from the camera, creates a brand new signal with the same data, and sends that out the HDMI port, and that's what's going to your switcher. So basically, by regenerating the signal, you're able to extend the distance that you can run and give yourself a little more length of cable that you can use in order to extend this just that little bit more. I wouldn't use this method for trying to run more than about 2 cables. You got to power these things along the way, and it's not a 100% robust solution. So yeah, I wouldn't do this on a normal basis, but if you have the occasional situation where you need just a little bit of extra distance, a splitter can get that for you. Similarly, there are HDMI extender devices that can do basically the same thing. They unfortunately tend to be a little more expensive than splitters because they're a more specialty product, and it's not something we necessarily have laying around, whereas those of us who work with HDMI probably have a splitter somewhere that we can throw into the run of a cable if we need to. The next most sophisticated solution that I can recommend is going to be getting an HDMI optical cable. Now, what the heck is that? I mean, HDMI is an electrical signal. What are we talking about? So, essentially what's going on is inside this cable, along with a handful of copper wires to help send power and a few other unsophisticated signals, basic signals, these actually have a fiber optic at least one strand fiber optic cable inside of it in order to send the signals. Optical signals are able to travel a lot farther than electrical signals. So by switching the signal to optical rather than something that's being run over copper, we're getting a signal that's a lot more robust and is going to be able to travel a lot farther. One of the downsides of these cables, though, is they can be a little bit expensive. This is a 50-foot cable, and it was $106. So you're paying a lot more for one of these than you would a standard HDMI cable, but sometimes you need the extra distance. These cables are directional, so in this case it's labeled source and display, and so in order to use these you have to make sure you get things plugged in the right direction. So if, for example, if I want to plug it into this camera, I'm going to have to use an HDMI coupler here, and then I plug in the source into the camera and plug the display into the input on the switcher. It has to be run in that direction. If you try and reverse it and connect things up the other way, it's not going to work. So you have to be careful when you're setting up. Make sure you spool out the cable in the right direction. These are not 100% all the time. I have had situations with certain types of equipment where they just don't work. For example, the most common one I've run to is running a computer, a laptop or whatever, to a monitor. I had numerous situations that I was testing this where that just didn't work. I had better luck with cameras, so as I tested a few cameras with this situation, it actually worked fairly well. And if you take a peek here, you can see that the video from my camera is going through this cable and making it into my ATEM switcher. One of the other pros of doing this is it doesn't require any outside power. This cable, even though it does require power, is receiving it from the connected devices, so it's either getting the power from the camera or the switcher or some combination of both in order to do that conversion from electrical to optical. So devices you're plugging in have to supply a little bit of power. It isn't much, but they have to supply a little bit of power in order for this cable to work. So besides being kind of expensive and directional and not working with every device, this is a pretty good solution that can work in a lot of different situations. The next couple are going to be ways where we can send video over Cat5 or Cat6 cable, basically Ethernet cable, that type of same type of cable you use for doing a computer network. We've got a number of options that make that possible as well. What I have here is a pair of HDMI extenders. These particular ones are from Oray, but there's any number of brands that are out there that can work very, very well. So the way these work is I'll start with the sender. So this is basically the transmitter. So you have your HDMI coming from your camera, and you plug that into your HDMI input on the extender, and you plug in a power supply, and you plug in your Cat5 cable on one end, and then on the other end you'll essentially do the opposite. You have your Cat5 cable coming in, and an HDMI out that you'll run to an HDMI input on a switcher or whatever, and then supply power for that, and you're good to go. So these are able to work at much longer distances than a lot of the other options out there. So this particular pair of devices here is rated for about 400 feet, so a little bit over 100 meters, and they work pretty well. So these devices don't change the signal in any kind of way other than being converted to something that can run over Cat5, so you're not losing any quality by going this route. The only real downside to this is that these can be a little bit expensive, cheaper than some of the other options out there, and then you have to supply power on both ends. So this can be a decent option if you need to run an HDMI signal over a long distance. Alright, I've got another one here that uses Cat5. This is a little bit different in that it actually uses IP computer network protocol in order to send the video signal from one end to the other. So, whereas the previous extenders that we looked at used their own proprietary format for sending the signal over the cable, this actually uses IP networks. And in this case, I believe it's a UDP in order to send the video from one end to the other. These are similar in concept to the extender, but you have some differences there as well. So in this case, it also has a USB port for if you need to hook up a monitor, or sorry, hook up a keyboard or a mouse or whatever. You can do that. However, there are some downsides, and as I was testing these, and I got from a couple different manufacturers, as I was testing these, I found that the data that's being sent by these devices will completely saturate a computer network. So even though it's using IP, you're not able to have this be on the same network as anything else, and it doesn't matter whether it's a switch network or whatever. The VLAN, even VLANs I had trouble with when I was playing with this. So it generates so much data that it overwhelms any network that it's connected to. So I would really only consider these if you're able to control the flow of the signals from one end to the other and it's not going through any network switches that are being used for anything else. So the other downsides of these is they do reduce the video quality and they do introduce some delay. So I would really consider these only use them if you have to kind of solution. I found that they were not really reliable and robust enough in order to produce a high quality signal and for it to always work no matter what. So I would probably steer clear of this kind of solution for doing long distance HDMI runs. That brings us to our last one that I wanted to talk about today, and that is to convert the signals to SDI and run the signal over BNC coax cable. This is a great solution if you're going to be working in a situation where you need to interface with people who have professional video equipment that uses SDI, or if you need to run video in a building that already has coax run, so like cable TV lines, those kinds of things. Those can actually transmit an SDI signal usually just fine without any real issues. In order to do this, you'll have to have converters at both ends. So the side with the camera, you're going to have an HDMI to SDI converter, and then the other end you're going to have an SDI to HDMI converter in order to convert it back for the format that the switcher happens to need. So, and then between there you can have cable about up to about 100 meters, maybe a little more, depending on the quality of your cable, but a lot farther than you can run HDMI, that's for sure. So, and if you needed to go farther than that, you can actually use one of these SDI to HDMI converters in order to repeat the signal, sort of like we did with the splitter with the HDMI a little bit ago. So this can actually be a really good solution if you need to interface with hardware that has SDI connections anywhere along the way. Once you get anything higher end than like the ATEM Mini Extreme here, you're going to be getting into switchers that use SDI natively. SDI is the preferred format for video in the professional world, so if you might be working with somebody else who's running a video production company, you can almost be sure that they're going to be running SDI, so if you ever need to interface with them, these are great devices to have on hand just for that purpose, right? Just that purpose alone. But it's always a great way to get a signal to run a long distance as well. SDI cable is very inexpensive. You can pick this up at a hardware store and make it your own length very easily, much the same like you can with Cat5 as well. But the hardware to do the conversion for this is actually a little bit cheaper than some of the other options that we've seen here. Generally speaking, this would be my preferred option of the ones that we've talked about here if I need to run signals from very far. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that I do run a lot of devices that use SDI, and so it's great to be able to interface with those natively without having to convert from yet another obscure format. I should definitely mention to those of you who are using the Blackmagic equipment, so ATEM Mini, ATEM Mini Extreme, ATEM Mini Pro, whatever, along with Blackmagic cameras, and you're using the camera control features, that several of these solutions won't work to control the camera over a distance. So of those that I've shown, the HDMI splitter might not work, may or may not work. That's just going to be hit and miss. The HDMI fiber optic cable will probably work, but there's no actual guarantees. The HDMI extender, again, that one probably will not, though there may be exceptions to that. And the IP-based will definitely not work. That one's not going to support the necessary protocols in order to make that happen. And the SDI solution will work if you run two cables and use a pair of these bidirectional 3G converters. You have to run cables in both directions because the signals that are being used to control the cameras are being sent from the switcher to the camera. And with just a single SDI cable, you're only getting signals in one direction from camera to switcher. So you have to add a second cable in order to get that return signal going as well. And again, you have to have one of these bidirectional converters at both ends. So probably not the ideal way in order to do that because you are having to run two cables everywhere and get more expensive converters. But you can do it if you need to. You can do it in a pinch. So yeah, just if you're in that situation where you have pocket cinema camera and ATEM switcher and you need the camera control features, coloring, play, stop, recording features, those kinds of things, you do have to take some additional steps in order to make sure that those are going to work as well. So there you go, a few different options for extending an HDMI signal farther than you can get with just a cable alone. So yeah, if you need to run any more than 6 to 8 meters, then you probably want to take advantage of one of these solutions in order to get that signal to travel a little bit farther than it would otherwise. If you have any questions about this or anything else that's related to video production, you can leave those in the comment section down below. But even better is to join us over on Discord. We have a nice size, very helpful community on Discord. Address for that is djp.li/discord. That's showing up on your screen now. and ask your question there, and you'll get answers not just from me, but other people who are in this video production community as well. So very helpful, very nice people that are there that are happy to help. So the keen-eyed among you may notice that I'm not wearing a microphone at the moment. I'm actually trying something a little bit unique, a little bit different in this situation. So I'm using a shotgun microphone that's just up outside of frame here. In this case, I'm using the Audio-Technica AT875R. Downside to this is I'm not in a soundproof studio, so it may be a little bit noisier than some of the other mics that I have used in the past. But let me know what you think in the comments, whether this is acceptable or whether I should go back to wearing my usual mic, my headset mic there as well. That's going to do it. So everyone, thanks for watching and have a great day.